Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back, everyone, to our last lecture, lecture 15. I apologize up front that I'm going to have to go a little bit faster because even though I kept saying throughout that we have time, I guess I jinxed myself and I realized that, oh my God, we're at the last lecture and there's still quite a bit. Of course, the last several lines of poetry are the conclusion. That is pretty just kind of wrapping up the poem. We can do that quickly, but we're going to start with 107 and go all the way to the last line of the poem, which is 143. And the first thing we're going to talk about are the supplements to the syllogism, which is an important topic that will talk about how you can compose multiple syllogisms at the same time. And then we'll talk about the different types of reasoning, induction, syllogistic reasoning, etc. Then the next section is proofs. We're going to talk about what are the different types of proofs that we can use to make an argument. Of course, in logic, we are very much concerned with the rational proofs, whereas in the Sharia, there might be other types of proofs that we use. Then we are going to talk about conclusions, not conclusion of the text, the conclusions of a syllogism, and the different types of meanings that we get from these conclusions. And then following that, we'll do the wrapping up with the last lines of the poetry, which is kind of just read the line and translate. It's self-explanatory. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is stuff that we've already talked about, because I've already pointed out, because my way of teaching is to load you with examples. You will know now where the errors are and how there can be multiple syllogisms. So hopefully the pace of today's class is not going to be too off the mark, because hopefully, inshallah, if I've done my job, I do realize that logic is a difficult topic if you've never taken it before. If I've done my job, at least by flooding you with examples in each step of the way, hopefully now by the time we get to the supplements and we get to the errors and the type of reasoning will also make sense. There'll be some overlap also with usul al-fiqh. So we're going to talk about qiyas, usuli qiyas. It'll come in here because qiyas is dhanni, not qat'i. So that's kind of important. He'll highlight that for us. And being able to identify when there are mistakes. Again, that's one of my main lessons for you, is that people make logical mistakes because they don't think logically. Anyway, that's the game plan. Let's begin, inshallah, in the next clip. All right, so picking up in line 107, I'm going to do 107 to 110. قال المصنف رضي الله عنه ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. So our author says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and the next. Line 107. ومنه ما يدعونه مركبا لكونه من حجج قد ركب. Of the syllogism, there's a type which they call compound, because it is composed of a number of syllogistic arguments. Line 108. فركبناه إن ترد أن تعلمه واقلب نتيجة به مقدمة. So compose if you wish to know it and convert a conclusion drawn from it into a premise. So when you have two premises and a conclusion, this conclusion becomes now a premise for a new syllogism, added to a second premise to make a second conclusion, so on and so forth. 109. يلزم من تركيبها بأخرى نتيجة إلى هلم جرة, whose composition with another premise yields a conclusion and so on up to where you want to go with it. That's what I just said. And I'll give you an example. And then line 110. متصل النتائج الذي حوى يكون أو مفصولها كل سوا. If the compound syllogism is either connected to the conclusions, which is that which contains its conclusion, or is severed from them by not containing the conclusion, both are the same. So there is a connected one and a disconnected one. So that's what we're going to talk about. So basically, keeping in my line of teaching, if I give you an example. Every human being is an animal, and every animal has feeling. That concludes, therefore, every human being has feeling. Now I'm going to take every human being has feeling and then make that a premise. Every human being has feeling, and everything that has feeling grows, has organic growth. Therefore, a human being has organic growth. Or a human being has organic growth as a conclusion. Now we're going to make it a premise. Human being has organic growth, and everything that is has organic growth does not last forever. Therefore, the human being does not last forever. So on and so forth. Okay, that's basically the the compounded syllogism, and it could be connected or not connected. The one that I just gave you is connected in the sense that we have identified premise one, premise two, conclusion. Conclusion becomes premise one, premise two, conclusion, so forth. If it is not connected, then we just say the whole thing as a run on sentence without identifying which one is the conclusion and the premise. So if I said, every human being is an animal, and every animal has feeling, and everything that has feeling, it has organic growth, and everything that has organic growth does not last forever, and I keep going like that, I have, this is, even though it's a run on sentence, it's separate because it's a separate compounded syllogism, because we haven't identified where is premise one, two, then conclusion. Then conclusion becomes premise one, and new premise two, conclusion, so on and so forth. That's basically what he's saying. Okay, 111 and 112. See, I told you it's pretty simple. وإن يجزي على كل استدل فذا بالاستقراء عندهم عقل. This is called induction. And if a particular is used to deduce a universal, then it is known by them as istiqra, induction, which means that I have a universal statement or conclusion, and I go and search all of the actual parts to make sure that they are valid. And then line 112, وعكسه يدعى القياس المنطقي وهو الذي قدمته فحققي. Its opposition, the opposite of this is the logical qiyas, what we call syllogism in the study of logic. And this is which I presented before, so affirm them and the difference between them. And what we are looking for in the science of logic is al-qiyas, not al-istiqra. Al-istiqra is something that we do in fiqh. So, al-istiqra, induction, is two kinds, complete and non-complete. A complete istiqra, a complete induction, is I have a principle and I actually verify that every single example of this principle fulfills the principle. That's complete. It's like rock solid. Obviously, that's almost impossible in most cases. So we have the non-complete one, which is the majority of cases. What's an example of a non-complete induction? When we say that a woman's pregnancy is 9 months. That's just, I haven't measured every single woman in the history of humanity, in all geographies, so on and so forth. So obviously I can't do that. So it's going to be, we say bil istiqra. By induction, generally speaking, this is the range. But it means that it's dhanni. There could be an exception to that rule. When we have an exception, we're not very happy in logic. When we have an exception in fiqh, ahlan wa salam, because fiqh is based on al-dhunun. Most of the fiqh is based on that which is dhanni, not that which is qat'i. Okay, lines 113 and 114. وحيث جزئي على جزئي حمل لجامع فذاك تمثيل جعل. This is syllogistic reasoning. When one particular is constructed according to another particular with respect to a common cause, then this is a syllogistic reasoning that has taken place. And then line 114, ولا يفيد القطع بالدليل قياس الاستقراء وتمثيل. And syllogistic reasoning by way of induction, the istiqra, and analogy, qiyas, here we mean the legal qiyas, does not yield definitive knowledge. It's not dhan qat'i, but it's dhanni. So what the logicians call a tamthil, syllogistic reasoning, we call qiyas in usul al-fiqh. Let me see if there's another definition of that, translation of that. Yeah, okay. So a tamthil is like when he says when one particular is constructed according to another particular with respect to a common cause. That is the definition of legal qiyas, right? We have alcohol intoxicates, vodka intoxicates. There's a common cause, intoxication, so vodka takes the same ruling as alcohol, which is in the Sharia, the strict original definition of the alcohol is that it's date and grape wine. That's our legal qiyas. But that does not, for the logician, does not produce something that is definitive knowledge, because, well, what about the other iterations? Because it is an istiqra, it is an induction that is not complete. Of course, in the legal sciences, that's enough for us because we are looking for the hukm of something. Here we're talking about definitive knowledge in general. So that's why the tamthil, or the syllogistic reasoning, is a little bit less in strength. And therefore qiyas produces dhann, and that's why we have differences of opinion in fiqh, because different mujtahids would come up to different conclusions. Okay, I guess time-wise we're doing all right. Lines 115 and 116, now we're going to talk about proofs. وحجة نقلية عقلية أقسام هذه خمسة جلية. Proofs are either transmitted or reason-based. The class of the latter are 5. We'll talk about that in a second. So we have transmitted, al-hujja al-naqliya, transmitted proofs. What is transmitted? The Quran and the Sunnah and Ijma'. So when we say al-naql, when we say al-ulum al-naqliya, transmitted knowledge, we mean knowledge that comes from revelation. It's transmitted. That's our system of learning. When we say aqliya, al-ulum al-aqliya, the rational sciences, we are talking about things that come from reason, and he says there are 5 types of those proofs. So this is line 116. خطابة شعر وبرهان جدل وخامس I always say this word wrong. صفصتات نلت الأمل. So it's rhetorical, poetical, demonstrative, dialectic, and the 5th is sophistry, because it's the Arabized of sophistry. May you reach your hope. So these are the 5 types of rational arguments that we can have. It can be khitaba, it can be sometimes rhetoric, we're using language, or it can be sha'r, we're using poem. Burhan, we've established some kind of demonstration. Jadal, there's a dialectic argument, like what we're doing with the syllogism, and then there can be a sophistry-based argument. Of course, the burhan, the dialectic, the demonstrative, that's going to be the most powerful when it comes to logic, which he's going to talk about in the next clip, but I don't have time to do that now, so we'll pick up in the next clip with line 117, inshallah. Okay, picking up line 117, let's do 117, 118, and 119. So 117, he says, rahimahullah, أجلها البرهان ما ألف من مقدمات باليقين تقترن. The most elevated of those 5 that we just mentioned in the last line is the demonstrative, which is that which is composed of a premise accompanied by certainty, meaning a syllogism. And then 118, من أوليات مشاهدات مجربات متواترات. And the certainty there which are first principles, feelings, experimental, and unanimously transmitted reports. And then 119, وحدثيات ومحسوسات فتلك جملة اليقينيات. Intuitions and sense perceptions, these are the total number of premises. So these are 6. So the demonstrative is to demonstrate something either by first principles, okay? 1 is half of 2, okay? That's just we all know that. The whole is equal to the sum of its parts. Those type of axioms that you'll find in the beginning of Euclid's Elements, for example, which is a very important resource for us, especially the first book. So first principles. So we all agree that the distance between a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So that's just an axiom. It's the first principle. We know that. So I can use that to create a syllogism. Or we have mushahadat, things that you observe. No, I said feelings. I meant physically observe. Let me change that. It's not about I feel good or I feel bad. Obviously, that's not what he means. So you see that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west all the time. You see that when you light something with fire, it gets hot or it burns. Same thing. Mujarrabat, things that are empirically verifiable observations. mujarrab, it's tried. So you try something and then every time you try it, you get the same result. So that becomes a proof. Mutawatirat, universally transmitted reports. So I have never been to Australia, but the amount of people that have been and have described aspects of Australia are too many for them to have conspired over the span of time to lie. So obviously it is an established fact that there is a country called Australia and its descriptions are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? That's what mutawatir is. And then intuitions. Things that you know through seeing them in observation, like the light of the moon comes from the light, reflects the light of the sun. So you need a couple of steps to be shown that, and then, oh yeah, of course. So that's an intuitive. And then sense perception, المحسوسيات. That the sun is bright. So that's something that you perceive through the senses. So those are the total number of certain premises that we are after. And then lines 120 and 121. وفي دلالة المقدمات على النتيجة خلاف آت. And in the way that premises demonstrate the conclusion, there occurs the following difference of opinion. 121 عقلي أو عادي أو تولد أو واجب والأول المؤيد. That is the rational or habitual or the rational, habitual, or necessary, or rationally necessary. The first is the one that is supported, meaning that it is rational. What is the relationship in a syllogism between the premise and the conclusion? That's what he's trying to answer. So this is more of like an academic difference of opinion. I mean, it's consequential, but it doesn't change what we talked about on how we learn. Is it there's a rational progression if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C? What is the conclusion that we got? What is the relationship between that and the premise? It's rational. Or is it something that's habitual, adi? It's something that always occurs, like every time you see the sun rises, it rises in the east or sets in the west. Or is it something that is necessary? Some type of mental, rational necessary is a bad translation from me because the first one I translate as rational. Wajibun is something that is we can just say necessary. And what we go with in logic is that it's rational. The A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C, that's a rational argument. And that's why it's called logic, al-mantiq, because it's focused on the rational approach to understanding these things. Okay, now the conclusions in the syllogism. Line 122. وخطأ البرهان حيث وجد في مادة أو صورة فالمبتدأ. The error in the demonstrative argument, wherever it is found, is either in the content or the form. The first, the error relating to the content, is 123 في اللفظ كاشتراك أو كجعل ذا تباين مثل الرديف مأخذا. The first one with the error in the content is like in the expression, like a homonym, or like making a word which is something distinct, like its synonym with respect to how the latter is taken. So, we can make mistakes in the conclusions. Here, when he says conclusions, it's really the section on the errors of the conclusion. So, you can create an error in your syllogism if you make a mistake in the premise, the words that you're using, or in the concept, the tasawurat, the conceptualization that you have, which precedes the judgment, the tasdiqat. The mistake in the premise, in the language, can either be a mistake in the word or a mistake in the meaning. So you've used the wrong word, or you're using the wrong meaning of this particular word. Um, so the word al-qur' in the Quran, in the Arabic language, it either means a menstrual cycle or it means the pure period. So if I say this is a qur' and therefore it's haram to have sexual intercourse, well, which meaning of qur' do you mean? Because the word can mean, are you a Hanafi or a Shafi'i? Because it would mean two different things. So that wouldn't be the best constructed syllogism, because there's a mistake in the word that you used, because this word has two meanings, like 50-50, like equally has two valid meanings in the Arabic language. So which one do you mean? That would be like a mistake in the conclusion. That's how you create a mistake. Um, so, if somebody has a weapon that is not in use, or has like a gun that's, I'm not a gun, I don't know anything about gun, but like the pin is removed, or something, or it's soldered, or there's a way that it doesn't fire anymore. There's a technical term for it. I can't find it right now, but the gun doesn't fire anymore. And you're making some kind of syllogism about weapons, and this is a gun and it's dangerous, and all things that are dangerous are haram. But then this one is not, because you've used the wrong word to describe it. Even now I'm having a difficulty, because there's a word for it to show you that it's not in use, or that it can't be used as a weapon. Something like that. That would be another example. So that's one set of mistakes. And a lot of people, when they speak, that's where the mistake is. The mistake is not necessarily in the syllogism form. The mistake is in that they're using the wrong words, or they do not understand fully the meaning of the words that they're using. And usually you'll find this with politicians when they're making big statements and they make big arguments about big things. It's very sloppy, because a syllogism, as you can see, is a very precise thing. It has to be very well defined. That's why we talked about definitions. So this is a very common place where you'll find mistakes. I'll pick this up in the next and final clip, inshallah. Okay, lines 124, 125, and 126. وفي المعاني لالتباس الكاذبة بذات صدق فافهم المخاطبة. So you can also make a mistake in meanings. And in the meanings of the expression, by way of confusing a false proposition with a true one, so understand the speech. 125. كمثل جعل العرض للذات أو ناتج إحدى المقدمات, like making the accidental essential, or that which yields one of the premises as the conclusion. 126. والحكم للجنس بحكم النوع وجعل كالقطعي غير القطعي, and like passing on the genus and the same judgment that is passed on the species, and like making the non-definite or non-absolute definitive of absolute. So this is how you make mistakes in meanings. So, trying to see if there's an example. So he's saying, if you said, this is dead, and everything that is dead is an inanimate object, therefore this is an inanimate object. Well, that's a mistake, because an inanimate object is not an animal. So the whole setup of the syllogism is wrong, because the first premise is wrong. The second premise, that everything that is dead is an inanimate object. Well, that's not true. So just because somebody gives you a premise doesn't mean that you just accept the premise and you wait for the conclusion. The mistake can be in the premise itself, in misaligning something that is universal, making it particular, or vice versa, or something that is general and then is specific, so on and so forth. So meanings and errors in meanings is also another place where people make mistakes a lot. Line 127 about the deviating from the figures, like if you said every human being is an animal and every plant, every shrub is a plant. What does premise 1 have to do with premise 2? So that would be a mistake because the form is wrong. You haven't made them together. And we've talked about this ad nauseum. Okay, so that's the end of the mantiq part. Let me read for you the conclusion in the minutes that we have together and see what benefits we have from that. So this is from 128 to 144. So he says, rahimahullah, in 128, هذا تمام الغرض المقصود من أمهات المنطق المحمود. This is the completion and realization of the intended aim as regards to the fundamental principles of logic of the type that is praiseworthy. Because remember, he said that there are some logic that we don't want. Line 129 قد انتهى بحمد رب الفلق ما رمته من فن علم المنطق. Indeed, that which I have set out to achieve from the art or the study of logic has been completed with the praise of the Lord of Daybreak. And then 130 نظمه العبد الدليل المفتقر لرحمة المولى العظيم المقتدر. The humble servant who is in need of mercy of the great power and protector has composed in its verse form. 131 الأخضري عابد الرحمن المرتجي من ربه المنان. Al-Akhdari, Abdul Rahman, meaning Abdul Rahman al-Akhdari, rahimahullah, who hopes from his bountiful Lord. 132 مغفرة تحيط بالذنوب وتكشف الغطاء عن القلوب. For forgiveness that will cover all their sins and remove the covering from over the hearts. And then line 133 وأن يثيبنا بجنة العلا فإنه أكرم من تفضل. And to reward us with the garden of the highest chambers, for he is truly the most generous and those who are bountiful, inshallah, all of us. Line 134 وكن أخي للمبتدئ مسامحا وكن لإصلاح الفساد ناصحا. Be, O my brother, forbearing and tolerant towards a novice, beginner, and be one who gives advice when correcting wrong. 135 واصلح الفساد بالتأمل وإن بديهة فلا تبدلي. Correct the wrong with due reflection and not be hasty. If the appearance of a wrong is self-evident, do not affect any change. 136 إذ قيل كم مزيف صحيحة لأجل كون فهمه قبيحة. Since it is said that how many a person falsifies something that is correct because his understanding is unbecoming. 137 وقل لمن لم ينتصف لمقصدي العذر حق واجب للمبتدئ. Say to the one who shows no fairness in what I have set out, an excuse is a right that is obligatory for the beginner. 138 ولبني 21 سنة معذرة مقبولة مستحسنة. And a boy of 21 years of age there is an acceptable and good excuse. 139 لا سيما في عاشر القرون ذي الجهل والفساد والفتون. Especially in the 10th century when he was writing this, that is characterized by ignorance, corruption, and trials and tribulations. 140 وكان في أوائل المحرم تأليف هذا الرجل المنظم. The composition of this Rajas versified poem was during the first days of Muharram. Line 41 من سنة 41 من بعد 9 من المئين. Of the year 41 after 900, after the Hijrah, that is. 142 ثم صلاة والسلام صرمدا على رسول الله خير من هدى. Therefore, let the blessings and peace forever be on Allah's Messenger, the best of those who guided. 143 وآله وصحبه الثقات السالكين سبل النجاة. And on his family, trusted companions, and who have trodden the way of salvation. Line 144 ما قطع الشمس النهار أبرج وطلع البدر المنير في الدجى. For as long as the sun of the day cuts through towering constellations, and the radiant full moon rises in the darkness of the night. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and bless him and all of the ulama of this science. So, we've completed this poem, and in the couple minutes that I have remaining with you, the kind of his advice that he ends with is kind of golden advice, because Al-Akhdari and some of his other writings in the Maliki madhab, he kind of follows the same pattern where he's kind of giving general advice, which is that we live in tough times and we need to give excuses to one another. And sometimes things are self-evidently wrong, and something that is self-evidently wrong, it is evident that it's wrong. And we should be very cautious when we seek to point out errors of one another so that we don't violate each other's rights, nor do we want to create a situation in which we've created more harm than good, which oftentimes people that do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar that don't have any training in that, they do that. Okay, logic. It's very important. But it's also nothing. It's not a subject that you have to like give your life to. So I want you to understand its place. Is that basically you need to understand that there's tasawurat and tasdiqat. There's conceptualization and passing judgments. And the passing the judgment, the tasdiqat, is the main part of the logic. Now, unless you're going to become an expert in logic or philosophy, you don't need to know all of the minutia of the forms and all of that kind of thing. But what you need to know is that people do make error in their thinking because they are making an error in their syllogism. Sometimes, oftentimes, we don't speak in the formal way of syllogism, but we are. When you pass a judgment on something, there is some kind of logical process that took place in your mind. If that is not clear, your conclusion is not going to be clear. So when you find irrational people and incoherence, whether it be from individuals, institutions, governments, companies, religions, whatever the case may be, then there is an error in the thinking. And that's why this is important. But what's important about this is to use this as a tool into the rest of the Sharia sciences, not to just, endlessly riff on the, errors. I mean, at some point, somebody's going to do that. That's not me for sure. That's not my thing. But this level of instruction, to go through it a few more times, like this is, I think, for me, the second time I teach logic. I got things out of it this time that I didn't get the first time, but it's something that I probably would want to teach a few more times. And after that, be like, okay, it's a kind of like part of the toolkit, a permanent tool. I don't have to look things up anymore. It becomes natural. That's sort of what we're looking for. So that's why, again, I emphasize the examples over necessarily the terminology. The terminology is important because I need you to be able to access the original text. But what's much more important than that for me is that you understand its use and its utility in the Sharia sciences, especially when we come to study usul al-fiqh, especially when we talk about qiyas, about analogy, because analogy is a form of a logical syllogism, as he mentioned, and it's something that it's dhanni, so there will be differences of opinion. Those are the main things I want to talk about. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, we concluded the text today in our last class, and we began by, I closed the file before I hit play. We began with line 107, which is to talk about the supplement of the syllogism, and we learned about how you can, add the conclusion of one syllogism to be the premise of another one, so on and so forth. And then we talked about inductive reasoning, al-istiqra', and then we talked about logical qiyas, which is what they call qiyas in usul al-fiqh. And then we talked about the proofs, and we talked about transmitted proofs and rational proofs. Of the rational proofs, we said there are 5 kinds. Of the 5 kinds, the most elevated is demonstrative. That's why we're studying mantiq. And then we looked at the proofs that can come in the demonstrative proof, which are first principles, observations, experiments, unanimously transmitted reports, intuitions, and sense perceptions. And we said that we are always looking after the rational proof in the study of logic, because that's what's going to produce a rock solid, hermetically sealed syllogism. Then we looked at the errors and conclusions. Maybe I should change the translation to errors and conclusions. Anyway, we talked about how there can be an error in the premise itself, in the language of the premise, either in the words chosen or the meanings of the words. You chose like the wrong meanings or something like that. And that there can be premises that are not even related to each other, and then you draw a false conclusion, meaning you've gone against the form of the syllogism. So those are the main things that we talked about. We read the last sort of lines to kind of give ourselves some general advice that's important, and I tried to give you also some of my own general advice, which is to remember to use logic as a tool, and it's not the end, but it's the beginning of your toolkit, and how to come back to the Quran and Sunnah and interpret it correctly. So, alhamdulillah, I hope this was beneficial. The reason we pre record them is you can always rewatch them, and we'll interact with each other in our live sessions to make sure that we've handled any questions that people might have. But that's it for logic, and now we'll go on to some other new stuff in the next set of recordings. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira.